To start making these improvements to our jumping system, the first thing we'll need to do is head back on over to our input graph. We will need to take some of this code and pretty much repurpose a little bit of what we already have. So the one thing we're always going to need to do is track when we release the jump button with stop jumping for as long as we continue to use our default jump functionality. I think for the most part, we probably will still be using this, but I will be rolling a kind of custom jumping implementation as well. And I think we can keep both of these branch checks. We'll need these, and we could just either unhook or delete these for now. I'm going to delete things just so that we have a nice kind of clean slate to go from. So hopefully this will make things less confusing as we go through. One of the things which is really causing us an issue is the fact that we're not able to reset our jump current count. So the first thing is that we're going to completely remove this. We will keep our jump max count. This can still be used. So we can still base what we're tracking on the player, the character class details from the jump max count. So we can keep this as a double jump, but we're going to pull from here and we'll promote this to a variable. I'll just name this one jump count. So it's a little bit different so that we know it's our own. And this is what we'll now be using to track our number of jumps that have been made against the maximum jumps that we're allowed. Because this was never being changed, it never needed to be reset. We don't need to update this dynamically. We're fine to carry on using the default character version, and that should make things a little bit less confusing. We'll then want to do exactly the same thing as we were previously. We want to check whether or not we're falling, and we'll do different logic based on this. So we're first going to check that we can jump. Nothing's really changed there, just the way that we're checking that. We then want to check whether we're doing a ground jump or an aerial jump. Pretty much exactly as we were doing before. We can approach the ground movement first of all. This will be the easiest. So if we do have some jumps available and we're not falling, which means we are grounded, then we're just going to do our standard jump. So like I said, we're going to be calling some of the functions we already had, but hopefully just re-implementing it kind of reinforces what we're doing. So if we're on the ground, we're going to make use of the standard jump function, which is why we're keeping this over here. I had a feeling that we'd be using this again. One thing we do want to do now is this will, as you've seen before, this will update the internal jump count current, as it's called, in the character class, but that's no good to us. So what we want to do is we're going to control drag in the jump count value, and we'll use an increment operator here. So this will just add one to the current jump count, and this is going to be how we start tracking our own values, and we'll be using this, as we've seen just here, a little bit later on in some of the other functionality. So now there's an extra step we need to take. We actually need another branch. So we'll do another branch check here. And this one is going to be based on whether or not we are wall sliding. So I'll drag in the in-wall slide. And we're now going to need to account for another couple of different types of jumps that we can do. So these are quite simply whether we're doing a double jump from the air, or an additional air jump, we should call that, or whether we're doing a jump from the wall, so a wall jump. The simple version here that we'll do first is going to be our air jump. And what we want to do is play that animation that we had before. So play anim montage. And we're going to fill that with the double jump animation. Nothing else needs to change here, but there will be two ways that we can approach this. So the first way is going to be reusing our jump function. And this would work perfectly fine. Of course, we need to make sure that we also, again, always track our own custom jump count now. If we just do a quick play, we'll see that this looks pretty much exactly like what we had previously, just with an additional check. Okay, so really nothing much changed there. One thing you will notice is that you no longer have it resetting. So once you've jumped twice, we don't have that being reset at all. Simply because we don't have that being tracked, we need to do that on the onLanded function. And we could probably do that now just because this will help us when testing. So all we want to do is whenever we land, we want to make sure that we reset our jump count. So another quick test, we can see that we can jump twice, hit the floor, and then we can jump twice again. So nothing really looking very different here. And that's the first thing, is I kind of want this to have some variation. So I wanted to kind of show that we're using a different kind of jump if we are in the air. And the way that we can do that is by using another built-in function, which is the launch character. Now the launch character just is another function on the character class. It takes in a velocity, and we get the option to override the X and Z velocity of our character, which I will tick to true for these. And what this allows us to do is we can change the value that we'll be placing in here. So what we want to account for at the moment is we're going to get the current velocity. We want to add a vector to this to apply the final offset of the character launch. Now, what I'm going to do is split the structure pin here again. We only actually want to affect one thing. So we're getting the entire velocity, which means we'll be accounting for the X and the Y movement, but we only want to override or update the Z velocity, so adding velocity upwards. So we're not going to add anything to the other axes, but I will be adding a value of, let's say, I think we're currently using a value of 420 for the Z velocity. We'll change that a bit later. So let's plug in 600 for the air jump, so it feels a little bit different to the standard ground jump. We'll plug this in here and replace that with the increment pin as well. And we can test this. It's going to feel again pretty much the same, but we now have a little bit of extra flexibility with how we use this. We're not tied into using the jump function to automatically tally the current jump count that was previously being tracked. Again, we can change this out now for anything because we're doing this check ourselves, which means we can get a little bit of flexibility here. And generally, you'll find that the air jump is either weaker or more powerful than the ground jump. And if we were doing that with the default jump functionality, we would have had to have come in, checked whether we're doing a ground or an air jump, grabbed the character movement component, changed the jump Z velocity just for that one jump, reset it when you get back, and it can get a little bit messy. This way, all we need to do is we can promote this to another variable. We'll call this air jump velocity, or in fact, I'll call this one air jump force. And now we know that we can change this once, or we'll set this once. And that is the only time we'll need to account for this, because that will be accounted for otherwise in the logic that we'll be using. So this is just one of the other benefits that will come from understanding the logic provided by the Unreal Engine and all of these incredible classes that come with it, but also knowing how to extend them a little bit and add some custom logic and functionality to our classes to work exactly as we want them to. Now, we're going to take a lot of this in a very similar way. We'll be using most of this for our wall slide jump as well. So I'm going to Control W to duplicate this, and I'll plug this straight in up here. Now, we're not going to leave it exactly the same. There will be some changes, namely in the velocity that we'll be applying, especially the force away from the wall, because we want this to not just go upwards, we want this to go away from the wall as well. Mainly because, of course, that is going to be what stops us constantly sliding up the wall. And in most wall jumps, you want them to have some angle away from the wall so you can jump between multiple walls rather than just getting that vertical movement. Now, another thing is that if you had the art assets available, you'd probably want to make a montage specifically for launching away from the wall. But just to show that something's happening, I'm going to reuse the double jump, as this at least will show that some force is being made, and it's better than having no animation. The main changes we'll make, though, is that we won't need to add to the jump count here. I want to be able to jump almost indefinitely between walls, and we're going to do a few extra steps to account for whether or not we've made a double jump in the past when we're doing a wall jump. But the main thing we're going to change is the get velocity. That isn't of concern to us anymore. Instead, we want to find the character's forward vector. So we use the get actor forward vector. We want to multiply this by another float variable. So we use the multiply node. Now, if you're using Unreal Engine 4, that will let you search for a multiply vector by float. So I'd recommend using that. In Unreal Engine 5, that's been taken away from us. What we need to do instead is just plug in a float value here, and that will automatically convert the calculation pin for us. Now, we don't want to actually use the air jump force though. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'll rename this one wall jump force. And the reason being is, one, that we might want this to be different from the aerial jump force anyway, but also because we're facing in reverse essentially, because we flipped the character, what we want to do, we need to make sure that we invert this. So I can set this to -500 and multiply the value by -500. So we're moving, adding a force 500 units away from the wall to kind of propel ourselves forward based on where we're looking. And then the resulting pin from this can be plugged back into another addition pin down here. And as we've done previously, we're not going to apply anything to the X or the Y, but we will apply a Z value. And in this case, I think we can reuse the air jump force just for the Z part of the calculation here. If we find this isn't strong enough, and if we find we want these to be completely separate from each other, then we'll just come back and we'll replace this with another custom value. So again, we can come in and we can test our new implementation. and this isn't working quite as intended. So we'll take a look at why this might not be happening. So I'll keep this in play here so I can see what's happening in the background and select the player so that I can debug through this. So when we jump, we can see that we're not getting anywhere here. We want to make sure that we're getting that path taken there, and that is working. So we're doing the right type of jump. We know that we're checking into the right thing. It could be that we're not passing in enough value. So let's double this and maybe see if doubling this will make us launch away from the wall. It's because I pulled in the wrong thing here. So we're getting the air jump force. We want the wall jump force. I just didn't replace that, or thought that I did. So maybe the air jump force will be enough here. We need to make sure we're getting this negative value, and this just kind of reinforces why we need the negative, not the positive value there. So we'll go up again, jump away, and there we go. That's more of what you would expect from a wall jump. And that looks pretty good to me. I think that's fine. So from the other wall, we can jump from wall to wall, and that is looking pretty cool. So I'm happy with that. I think that's pretty good. That's essentially what I kind of expected on the first run before we realized that I had the wrong value plugged in. So that is good. Like I said, we might decide that we want some more verticality when we're doing a wall jump, but that is pretty cool for now. Now, the one thing that I like to see in games, this might be too easy for some games, it might be perfect for others, but what I've done there is I've done a double jump, and that is now capped out the maximum jumps that we can do. What we can do to address this is really consider how we want the jump system to work. Now, I personally like the games where you can almost kind of strategize with it, where when you hit a wall, you'll get an additional jump, specifically an additional air jump when you leave the wall again. So even if you've taken all of your double jumps or your aerial jumps, by doing a wall slide and jumping off, you get one more, so you can get, again, a tiny bit more verticality and that last kind of push away from where you were initially going. And to do this, there's a really, really easy thing we can do. We can make use of the logic we already have on the event graph just here when we know that we've already hit a wall slide. So we can get our max jump count, and we can set our current jump count. So this is kind of cheating in a way. It gives us the result that we want. So we can get the maximum jump count, take one away from this. So subtract one from the maximum and set the current jump count to that for as long as we're on a wall slide. So this means that every time that we enter a wall slide, this solves two problems. So now, even if we've done a double jump, this immediately resets the jump count so that we have one left available. And then we can go from wall to wall. And then not only that, but we get one more additional jump at the end, which is what I quite like to get that kind of extra feeling of control over the character. And like I said, this might not work in all games. It might make things too easy, or it might add some flexibility that would ruin the puzzles that you had in mind. And that's fine. If that's the case, then just don't do this bit. So skip this bit. And what you'd want to do is you could do, again, multiple things. So every time that you hit a wall, maybe take one away here so that you could have continual wall jumping as long as it's a wall jump state, but make sure to cap that so that you don't get to reset that and do another double jump afterwards. The other option would not be do any of this at all, so don't base this on the jumping logic. The very easiest thing would be to reverse some of the checks here. So what you could do is do this branch check first. So if you're in a wall jump, don't even check the number of jumps available. Just go straight into this logic if the jump button is pressed. And I'm not going to go through that just because I think it's easy enough to implement, but it's not the type of functionality that I'm looking for. But that would be another option. Then what you're doing is you're only checking against the jump count versus the maximum jump count for the either ground jump or the aerial jump. And that's something that's going to help us here, actually. I'm going to comment around all of these, just so that it becomes very easy at a glance when we come back to see exactly what all of these branching states are leading into. So we can see now that one is going to be specifically checking to see if the result would be a ground jump. The other is checking to see if the result would be an air jump. And the final one checking to see if the final result will lead to a wall jump. And then we know where to update this logic in the future. So hopefully that all made sense. Hopefully that description as well. I've not went into kind of tangents like that. I try to keep that to a minimum. But I appreciate that the approach that I've taken might not be what you're looking for. I can only think of a few different types of wall jump to air jump combinations. And I think that explanation kind of covers all grounds if this isn't quite what you were looking to get done. But I think for me, that is something I quite like. So that additional air jump is pretty cool at the end. And I think that looks pretty cool. We've got the velocities that we want, or at the moment that look good. Again, we'll be updating the gravity and things a bit in the future. So we might come back and replace some of this anyway, specifically the launching variables that we have. The final thing, I don't think this is going to be happening. On some rare cases though, what you might find is when you're sliding down the wall, oh, it does. Okay, so we want to reset this. I thought it would be less likely to happen. So because we are doing the wall slide and I guess we're technically not entering landing, or if we are, something on the event take us firing to replace that after the landing reset would have been done, which isn't a problem. So actually I can see what it is. At the moment, we're only resetting it from wall sliding if we jump whilst on a wall. So what we also want to do on the landed, we're just going to do kind of a clean sweep reset of all of the values that we're tracking. So just to double check really that nothing gets missed out like that did. So we want to make sure that when we hit the landed state, we are no longer wall sliding. We can also make sure that we hard reset the jump count. So we need to make sure that that's being tracked as well. And although this shouldn't need to be done, we can also just make sure that this gets called. So calling this one extra function or event isn't going to cause us any issues. So we can find our wall slide velocity reset call, and we'll use that one as well. So when I was sure, we've done this one twice, I didn't notice that. I think what I was actually considering is the gravity check. What we probably want to do is this just here. So we're going to get our gravity scale, and we'll make sure that we also reset the gravity so that we don't have that being missed out either. We obviously don't want to slide off of the wall, forget to reset the gravity, and be running around with a 0.01 gravity or something, because the next time we jump, we'll take off. When we now land, we're going to reset the jump count, the wall slide reset check, and the gravity scale, just so that none of these are missed out on any kind of bizarre use case scenarios. So we can do that, and we're going to get that back normally. We can slide down, and that is all looking perfect. So also remember that if you are wondering where that capsule is coming from, that's just because we have this tracing, so or debugging, so we'll set that back to none. So I think we're pretty much done with that now. So we can jump and we won't get that debug trace, and that is looking perfectly fine. We can tidy this up, but we will probably make a few more improvement passes to this in the kind of final polish stage. So we'll leave this for now. What I think we can do is we know that this is completely to do with jumping. So we'll come back in here. We'll grab all of these nodes, shift select all of these nodes, and we'll drop this down into a function, and we'll call this one jump check. I think what we're doing here is we're not just jumping, quite specifically, we're checking what to do with the jump input. So just because the player's pressed jump, we're going to check whether we can jump. If we can, what type of jump. So I think that name kind of makes sense for the functionality being housed in there. That is pretty much it. So I think with all of that done, they are the main mechanics. I haven't noticed during these kind of brief demonstrations here that anything isn't working. So that seems to be the bulk of the main mechanics working. There's one thing that does stick out to me a little bit, and that is that there's especially when we're going up, I can see why that's going to be. There's a brief moment before we get this rotation being applied. And that is because we're not doing this until we have confirmed we're in a wall slide, and until we've also confirmed that the velocity has been set to 0. So even if we're in a wall slide, if the velocity isn't 0, we're not doing this. So we're going to fix this as well. I think that might be under the polish pass because it's not really stopping anything from working. But it doesn't look great because you've got, it's kind of a snap that feels like it comes a little bit too late. So we'll keep that in mind, but I think we'll keep this very topical. We've just done our jump mechanics improvement, and we'll come to the other issues in their own topics. Hopefully you've enjoyed that content, and just a reminder, if you wanted to get access to the full topics in this mini course, it's already fully available and uploaded over on Skillshare. I'm providing links in the description down below, which will allow you to sign up with a free premium trial. You'll gain full access to all of the courses over on Skillshare, including this 3D platformer focused controller topic. So be sure to check that out if you wanted to take advantage of the offer whilst it lasts. And as always, I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of the people supporting all of the work that I do here on YouTube, allowing me to keep making this weekly content. So a big thank you to all of the names scrolling down the screen.